record this. Okay. So tonight we're going to look at some network attacks. Kevin asked about some tools, specific tools, Metasploit, which is a piece of software that comes on Kali Linux and Backtrack, the old Backtrack, that takes advantage of many of the vulnerabilities. It's not automatic. None of this stuff's automatic. It takes some time to do these things. So when you start doing these tools, at least for me, I'm kind of dense, but they don't always start out working really great. And we get accustomed to Windows, and we click, point and click, point and click, point and click. And a lot of the Linux tools, a lot of the quote hacker tools and the penetration testing tools, which are good guy hackers, aren't automatic. You've got to have quite a bit of knowledge and practice with the tools before they work. Some of them are cracking WEP. There's a number of softwares that will let you do that. But the things like the Metasploit, I'll be honest with you, it took me about 3 months before I actually got it to work. It would say it was working, and I never got a compromise for a while, and then that was only on an XP machine. So you really have to practice with these tools if you want to do penetration testing, or and hopefully not do bad guy hacking, but good guy hacking. Anyway, tonight we're going to look at a couple of network attacks and how they get into the system, and some tools that we can use. The first objective is understand the relevance of the OSI model to network technologies and protocols. OSI models is one of the things that a lot of us love to hate. But when you get into security, you're going to find that it's your best friend, because what's going on, what can be compromised at what layers of the OSI model. You're going to find that TCP has some real weaknesses. IP has some real weaknesses. We ported some security into IP, but both of those are they're insecure protocols. So we have to be aware of what's going on with them. Describe the function of network sniffers and protocol analyzers. They're kind of one and the same. A sniffer just gets the data. A protocol analyzer does an interpretation, has a library that will put it in a semi-readable format for us. Describe the procedures and products used to survey and test security systems. Describe network attacks such as scanning, spoofing, man-in-the-middle replay, and denial of service. And these are things that obviously are all real and that we want to guard against. So the first slide, and I think the first thing in this chapter is the OSI model. And my book has a note in the margin that says that specific knowledge. So here it is. Students must be able to name the layers of the OSI model and match functions, protocols, and devices to the appropriate layer. We're going to get attacked a great deal at the network and transport layer, IP and TCP. The data link layer, not so much, because the data link layer, remember, layer 2, physical layer, collision domain, you have to be on the same network. When we start routing, the packets can go lots of different places, and they can then be used to do a number of things. Even if the user doesn't, quote, get into your network, they may be able to use the weaknesses to do a denial of service attack, for instance. The TCP ISP suite with some applications, and I know you've done all that. The applications are the things that run up here. The DoD model, the TCP/IP model, is the one that actually is pretty representational about functionality, because over here on the 7-layer model, we break these things out and you say, okay, a NIC, where is a NIC? What layer is a NIC? Well, it's a layer 1 and a layer 2 device, and the test that I've seen, I always wanted you to answer it's a layer 2 device because it's got a MAC address, but it's a layer 1 device because that's where the media connects into it. And then with the internet, those work out the same in both of these things. And the protocols that we have here, TCP, UDP, IP, ARP is a real problem, and that's where we're going to look at a lot of the man in the middle attack scenarios. And then we talk about network boundaries and show backbone. Here we have segments. Segments are generally going to be layer 2 segments. So we have segment here, which is on a switch, and I love this one. We take a switch, a really good device here, and then we put a bus on it. We put hook a hub up so that we can do these things. And when you think about a hub, can be useful to you if you need to monitor the network, because in a hub you see everything, and then when you put the sniffer on, you put the NIC into promiscuous mode so that it accepts all of the traffic, not just that's to it which it's supposed to. And then we have another each of these subnets, we have segments at layer 2, and then subnets here at layer 3. And then the router itself is going to connect the networks together. And the backbone is a high-speed connectivity, obviously, and then we'll go to the internet and get killed. But we have our network, our internal network, perhaps, and all of these different items that are a part of it. Sniffers and protocol analyzers, as a sniffer captures the frames from the network. And when we start capturing frames from the network, we need to be aware of what kind of devices that we're using. Because remember, when you do a switch, you only see the traffic that is to you on your segment, because we do microsegmentation with these things. So you only see the traffic that is to you, and it becomes hard to monitor what goes on the network. That's where a hub could come in handy, or a span port, a port mirror when we do those things. And sniffers, hardware or software, generally I think what you're going to see are software sniffers. The free one that is used here and that I've always used is Wireshark. It works very well, but it doesn't cost anything, so and it just works, and you can use it on both Linux and Windows. Another one that is very good is TCP dump. Hub switches in promiscuous mode. We talked about switches and hubs. The hub, we're going to see everything, and I did a couple of lessons on a Wireshark course, or I did a Wireshark course actually, and the instructor kept talking about when you do these things you may need to hub out. Keep in mind that when you put a hub in the system, it's probably going to slow things down because we've just created collisions when we do that. Okay, back to this. Hubs, switches, and promiscuous mode. Promiscuous mode is something that the sniffers do, the captures do, in order to see all of the traffic in the system. It's the only way, because you remember that a NIC only takes traffic to itself. What it does is compares the header information, the layer 2 header information, to see if it's to its MAC address, and if it's to its MAC address, it accepts it, otherwise it rejects the traffic. So what we have to do in order to see everything is put in a promiscuous mode so that it will then accept all the traffic, and then we can capture it with our Wireshark or TCP dump or the Microsoft Protocol Analyzer. A number of them are available, and see our traffic. So the Protocol Analyzer and the Sniffer, these two things go together generally. Wireshark we call a sniffer. It's really a protocol analyzer because they've got one over here. What it does is interprets the data for us so that it shows up in a readable kind of format. And we see the information down here, and then down at the bottom here we have hexadecimal, what it looks like in hex. So it decodes and presents the frames for analysis, and we can do network monitoring with these things. Network monitoring, kind of a big deal. What's going on with each of these things. And we talk about packet injection. I alluded to a little earlier about hacking WEP, and when you do it, when you hack it, what you do is you set it up with the wireless issues, and then you inject packets into the network to get enough traffic in order to create collisions, which we're going to make a duplicate of, get duplicate initial vectors so that we can then hack the system. It kind of talked about preventing eavesdropping. Can you do it? Yeah, kind of, sort of. There is, Nmap has a script that allows you to monitor your network for NICs that are in promiscuous mode. NICs that are in promiscuous mode have different characteristics than those that aren't in promiscuous mode. So you can kind of sort of monitor it, and you have to be on the same network. You have to be in a collision domain to be able to see these things. The reason I'm stumbling, I go back to see if anybody else has shown up, if I missed anybody on the attendance, because I don't want to do that. Anyhow, prevent eavesdropping. It's one of the ways we talk about policies is policies and enforce policies in order to make it so that people can't install these devices on the network and monitor the network. You may or may not want to do that, and you can, again, you can with Nmap set it up in one of their scripts to watch for NICs that are in promiscuous mode, and those are typically going to be the ones that are going to be scanning for you. Your book has, and this stuff's on page 45, a number of back up here to Sniffers and packet capture software, Wireshark, Microsoft Network Monitor. One of the issues with Microsoft Network Monitor is most versions of it really doesn't go into promiscuous mode. I found Wireshark to be the one that probably is the easiest to use for me personally. Kismet, Linux, TCP dump is a command line. It says it captures for Unix and Linux. It also is ported to Windows, so you can use it there too. DSNF and EtterCap are all going to be packet capture softwares, and then when we do interpretation, the software does interpretation, and then we're going to call it a protocol analyzer. When you do these different capture softwares, they're all going to look a little bit different. They're going to interpret things a little bit differently. So you've got to kind of look at it and see what's going on. And then packet injection, I talked about doing wireless. The other thing is we may want to send spoofed traffic to somebody. If you do that, we're going to inject that traffic. And there are some tools for that, dsniff, ettercap, for packet injection. And the reason you might want to do that is a denial of service attack, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, where I guess I'll mention it now and then we'll talk about it. I'll mention it again, but where you spoof an IP address of a server, for instance, and then you maybe ping the broadcast address and trying to get responses from all of those systems, and when you do that, get responses, and the responses go back to the server that you're trying to conduct a denial of service attack on. Those are the kinds of things that you might want to have those things for. ARP attacks. ARP is a not real smart piece of software. It matches IP and MAC addresses, and it will take the answer to a question that nobody ever asked. And that's one of the ways to do a man-in-the-middle attack. And that's kind of what this picture down here is about. When we do an ARP, it's a broadcast ARP. Tell who has 192.168.1.1, tell whoever. And what it's looking for is the MAC address. We have an ARP request and then an ARP reply. The ARP request is a broadcast, and the ARP reply is typically going to be a unicast because it goes back to the individual that asked the question. So with those, and the way we want to do a man-in-the-middle attack, it maps the IPv4 to hardware, ARP poisoning, things that can do this. Cain enable is the one that you'll use. What we do is set up Cain enable to poison the network, and when we do that, it tells all of the machines on the network that I am the default gateway, so all the traffic goes through me. And when all the traffic goes through me, I can then monitor it, watch for credentials and all sorts of stuff. And it doesn't really take a whole lot to set this up. But ARP poisoning, we're talking again layer 2. You're going to have to be on that network. And we'll go back to I'll refer back to, we talked about policies. What kind of policies you're going to have for these things? What are users going to be able to do on the network? MAC flooding down here, we talked about switches, and switches do microsegmentation so that you only see the traffic to you or broadcast traffic. What MAC flooding does is overwhelms the switch's MAC table or CAM table, content addressable memory in the Cisco world, so that when the MAC table gets full, can't take any more, gets overwhelmed with MAC addresses, and usually random MAC addresses, and there are MAC off is one of the tools that will do that, flood the MAC table. The switch then kind of reverts to a hub, and you can see all the traffic. Now when you do this, honest to goodness, it's going to slow the network down because you're getting so many of these things. So we might have an issue with network speed as well as what goes on with the MAC flooding. But the objective for that is to be able to turn a switch into a hub. ARP poisoning, one of the primary purposes of that, probably the primary purpose of that, is to conduct a man-in-the-middle attack so that we can send all the traffic through us. Replay and man-in-the-middle attacks. Spoofing and masquerade as a general attack can take place at the levels. Can be used for identity theft and social engineering. Spoofing is when we pretend to be something that we're not, obviously. Masquerade is the attacker imitating some sort of a resource. And what a replay attack is going to do is sit out there and watch what goes on the network, obtain some authentication data, and use it to regain access. What it's going to do is use one of the sniffers to record this information and then replay it later to try to reestablish the session. Now, the newer authentication protocols have a timestamp component in it, which makes the replay not very effective because of the time component. When you get to Kerberos, it has to be within 5 minutes of the time. The time step has to be within 5 minutes of the server time, or it won't accept it. The other thing that can stop replay attacks is going to be encryption, because if it's encrypted, we're not going to be able to see the information unless you have the key, and we'll talk about those later on. And then the man-in-the-middle attacks, we're going to intercept packets without the sender or receiver knowing, can monitor the contents, and then we can modify the packets and send them on. What we're going to do is use something like an ARP attack, tell the system all the machines on that collision domain that our MAC address is the default gateway. Then all the traffic comes through us. We can monitor the contents, look at what's going on in the system, modify the packets perhaps. They talk about modifying packets. A lot of this stuff is not as easy as it sounds in some of the literature, but man-in-the-middle attacks are issues. IP spoofing, TCP/IP hijacking, spoof an IP address, and these are a number of tools that will spoof the IP address. When you're spoofing the IP address, don't expect to get an answer back, because when you spoof the IP address and send it out there, the response is going to go back to the actual IP address that's in the system. And then TCP hijacking is the three-way handshake, the SYN, the SYN-ACK, and the ACK, non-blind spoofing and blind spoofing. What you're trying to do is to inject yourself into this conversation, into the three-way handshake, and take over the session. The non-blind, the attacker's on the same subnet and you can sniff the sequence number and acknowledgement numbers and try to get into the conversation by using those. And the non-blind spoofing is using that. The blind spoofing, you're on a different network and you're basically guessing at what goes on. I know these things can be used, but this is another set of information that is not as easy, or another way to do this stuff is not as easy as it sounds in most cases. Icmp Redirect is really a, if you don't have it turned off, it's really not something that you want, because what it does is something else in an Icmp redirect message tells a router or a machine to use an alternate route, and the alternate route could be through our very own bad guys system so that they can monitor what's going on. I put this, I don't know if you've ever been there, but www.networksorcery.com has got some really good images and explanations of what goes on in the different layers of the OSI model. It's got a lot of information there on TCP/IP, Icmp, the protocols that we love to love and love to hate. Footprinting, we have footprinting, and then we have fingerprinting. Footprinting, we're going to discover network and host configurations in these things. Footprinting is network mapping. What we're looking for are protocols, services, applications running on the network, and they're going to have, in the lab, they have you do one of those. Workstations, server types, OS types, network addresses and host names, interconnect devices, and security appliances software. What we're trying to do is find out what's on the network. I did if I can get it going. We'll scan of a network. To kind of give you an idea, and they're going to have you do one of these things. I can't remember where I put them. Let me drag this over here. This is ZenMap, which is the Windows version of Nmap, and it's the one that they're going to have you do. This is the Nmap output. I scanned a portion of a subnet. We've got ports and hosts here. So look at hosts. Well, maybe we'll look at hosts. Here we go. Hosts, or as we go up and down these things, host details. So we'll look at these things, and sometimes we're going to get the type of OS that it is. But this one is not sure enough to tell me what they were. What we're going to get are ports and hosts. What ports are open on the host? And then we can go over here to the services and click on the services, and it'll tell us which services are running on which of the hosts that we scanned. Global Catalog LDAP, which tells us that these are probably domain controllers. Global Catalog is the only reason it would have those. Which ones have HTTP? Gives you an idea of how to start an attack. Back to host details. Anyhow, footprinting and fingerprinting are going to use these kinds of things. User counts and groups. There are some of the scanning softwares that can do that. The Microsoft Analyzer, Security Analyzer, Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer, as long as you're an administrator, will tell you about the accounts. And sometimes it's handy to scan these things as the administrator so that you know what's going on your network. Fingerprinting identified a host configuration, scan the TCP and UDP ports, and then the IANA assigned numbers. We have the well-known 0 to 1024, and the well-known are the ones that we have when we go to HTTP. The well-known port is port 80 for the HTTP service. The registered are from 1024, 1025 to 49151. That different softwares using these ports can be registered to that particular port. Ephemeral or temporary ports, those are the ones that we use for the random ports. When you connect from a machine to another machine, we go to the well-known port. HTTP, we go to the well-known port 80. The port that we go from on our machine is going to be the ephemeral port. It's going to be a random port. So it's going to be something that is greater than 49.151 typically, up to 65.535. One of the things that you can do is configure a non-default port. If you do that, then you're going to have to specify what port to use for a particular protocol. And then the source versus the destination port. The source port is the ephemeral port, and the destination port is going to be the well-known port where we're going to. And what I always like to relate that to is just me, is calling a phone number. If you call a phone number, if you want to call somebody well-known by their name, you know their name, then you have to call their particular phone number. You can call them from any phone number. So in this case, we can call from any port as long as it's not a well-known or a registered port, and we're going to call to a well-known port. The Christmas tree attack is what it has. It's an Nmap thing that we can use for an attack, and it just has some weird combinations of switches set on it, so that we're trying to get a response, trying to find what ports are open. And the little scan that I showed you actually was an Nmap scan, but it's in a GUI format called Zenmap for and that's for Windows. But port scanners, we have Netstat. Netstat we run on our own machine, and it'll tell us what ports are working on that machine, which ports are connected, which ports are waiting, which ports are in use on the machine. It's kind of a handy thing to do. In today's world, there's so much going on, though, it really becomes a little bit difficult to figure out. And one of the switches, and I don't remember which one, will allow you or show you which application is associated with the open port. Netstat on our own machine. Other scanners, port scanners, Nmap, Nessus, SuperScan, Altieri Web Security port scanner, and then there's one called SuperScan's right there. SuperScan is one that's pretty easy to use. It's a GUI format. Nmap over here, we scan with it. Command line, again, unless you use Zenmap on Windows to do those things. And the scanning techniques are to probe the ports, what ports are open. When you get into this thing, what you have to, if you really want to not be caught, you need to pick one of the slow scans, because if we're running a protocol analyzer and the scan happens, you're going to see sequentially somebody try to connect on all or most of the ports. You can do a scan for a particular set of ports. You can have it scan all the ports depending on what you want to do. You can scan an individual address, it'll resolve DNS, or you can scan a subnetwork or network with using a either using the /net or just something like 192.168.1-50, which would scan 192.168.1 through 192.168.50. The Christmas tree attack probes a router. It sets the fin, push, and urgent flags on the TCP packet. That's an atypical packet, and it sometimes is possible to identify the operating system with this thing. What we're trying to do is discover what ports are open on this thing. What you need to do when you're scanning your network to see if there are ports open that shouldn't be. What are these weird ports that are open? Is it one of the back doors that somebody put on? We can block all scans at the firewall with an intrusion detection system. intrusion detection system sometimes will take actions, and the intrusion prevention system is the one that you really want to take action. And this goes back to the, I guess, the commercial that's going around now, the guard or the security monitor in the bank. When they say there's a hold up and what you're going to do something, you say, I'm not a security guard, I'm a security monitor. There's a hold up. That's what an IDS does. There's been an incursion, an intrusion, and it's logged. It doesn't in many cases. There are some cases that you can set it up to take certain actions, but an intrusion prevention system is one that actually will try to block the system. Banner grabbing, probe the server and analyze the response. What we're looking for here is what kind of systems are running. Get that away again. I was going to see if I had one here. Will it tell us, for instance, what version of IIS is running? I don't have that one there, but what we're looking for is what softwares are running on those ports. So if we find port 80 open, then are we looking at an Apache server? Are we looking at a Windows IIS server? If it's IIS, is it IIS 7, IIS 6? What is it? What kind of vulnerabilities might we have with the system? When you look at the scan here, this bomb means that there's a lot of ports open on this particular machine, and you look down here and it says it's a Windows machine. This is one that has identified the operating system with it. Configure servers and applications not to leak information. What we want to do here is keep the ports closed as much as possible so that we're not allowing information to go out. If you're inside, and I think I talked about this a little bit last night, inside the network and outside the network, you're probably going to find when you do scans that the scans are radically different. That a server that maybe shows 2 ports outside the firewall may show 15 or 20 inside the firewall, because if it's Windows and if it's Active Directory, it's going to have all the Windows stuff open on it, and it needs those to do that. But we can configure the servers so that we can, what we need to do is turn all the services off that are unneeded on it when we do these things. Denial of service attacks, and part of the CIA, remember, was availability. Denial of service is going to affect that availability, and the objective is to make it unavailable. We have the distributed denial of service attack, DDoS, that generally going to leverage the bandwidth from a compromised host, and probably going to have a networks a bot army out there. And when you infect the systems, probably a couple of them are going to be set up to control the attack. Keep in mind that one of the ways to avoid participating in a bot army is to not let the traffic out of your network. Configure your firewall both for incoming and outgoing traffic so that you can not participate in these things. Application exploits. There are a number of application exploits, and we talked about Metasploit a little earlier. It has exploits, sometimes application exploits, sometimes others. There are easy to use denial of service tools. Smurf Attack. Well, the Smurf Attack is one that we're going to ping the broadcast address. And they talk a lot about pinging the broadcast address, but try that sometime and see if it actually works for you, because a lot of times, most of them, and then they used to talk about the ping of death, where you made a very large ping packet which would crash the server, and they would in times past, but many of these pinging the broadcast network and those sorts of things are not as effective as they used to be when you do these things. The SYN attack is one of the ways to do these things. We send the SYN packet, the SYN ACK comes back, and then we're supposed to send an ACK. But we don't. We send another SYN and we get the SYN ACK and send a SYN and a SYN ACK. So what you do is fill the buffer up so that other users can't get onto the server. Once the buffer gets full, then it won't take any more connections. One of the ways around this is many firewalls will, when you do this, SYN, and then the SYN ACK will actually send the ACK to the server, wait for it to come from the host that started this thing, and if it doesn't come, it drops the connection. So another configuration thing to try to prevent those types of attacks. So with that, golly, we got to the end. Understand the relevance of the OSI model, and it is the relevance of the OSI model, the thing that we use to do that. The function of network sniffers and protocol analyzers, the procedures and products used to survey and test security systems and describe network attacks such as scanning, spoofing, man-in-the-middle, denial of service attacks. And I think we talked about all of those. Let me get back to this thing. So, it's time to do the questions, and you guys got to answer them. Is it possible to eavesdrop on traffic passing over a company's internal network from the internet?
Yes.
Is it really?
Where there's a will, there's a way.
But only if they route it to you. Remember, a sniffer has got to be on the network that you're on. It's got to be in the collision domain. If you happen to be in the path going to the ISP, for instance, yeah, you could see the traffic, but the sniffer has got to be on the same local network segment. The network segment is going to be the collision domain. Why might an ARP poisoning tool be of use to an eavesdropper? Why would we want to do that? What would an ARP poisoning attack do for you? Will that scare everybody off? Okay, let's look at 1.4 assessment tools and techniques. And this is a relatively short unit in module 1, but what it's talking about is vulnerabilities and versus pen testing, and some of the tools that can be used. So the objectives here describe and distinguish vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, identify types and proper use of vulnerability scanners and penetration testing tools, describe the purpose of a honey pot and a honey net. So the two of these things, the thing that distinguishes one from the other is vulnerability scanning is generally passive. Penetration testing is active. You're actually trying to exploit the vulnerabilities. In the vulnerability assessment, you're trying to discover by auditing your network what vulnerabilities are there. And it says here generally it's a passive technique. Discover the vulnerabilities. We don't try to exploit them. And identify lack of security controls and misconfigurations. Nessus is one of the very popular vulnerability scanners. I think, it's gone commercial, and OpenVAS is one that is open source that you can use, but vulnerability scanners are available, and if you want to try one out, generally you can get them for a 30-day trial, and then they'll try to sell it to you, but you can do this thing. Penetration testing is, you want to find ways to bypass the security controls, find ways to bypass the policies and all the things that we set up to make the network secure. We want to remove or disable the controls, as they say in those things, and then exploit the vulnerabilities. The pen testing steps generally are: verify that a threat exists. We're going to use surveillance. We're going to use the scanning techniques, find out what's there, social engineering, vulnerability assessment tools, everything that's available to us. Then we want to try to bypass the security controls. Easy ways to attack the system, and earlier in the evening we were talking a little bit about Metasploit. That may be one of the tools that you can use to find an exploit on a system. And then you want to test the security controls. Once you do that, we want to exploit the vulnerabilities to prove that the threat exists. The methodology, the scope, has to be determined. If you do pen testing, you need to clearly establish what you're going to be able to do before you start. Models and frameworks, and this is a NIST publication for penetration testing. Testing, we want to discover the vulnerabilities, and then we're going to examine assessment objects to understand the security system, and after that interview and gather information and probe the attitudes towards an understanding of security. So what we want to do is really test the entire security system. The scope that you may use: external threats, insider threats, and software vulnerabilities. We need to test each of those areas. The insider threats, again, are going to be probably more dangerous than the external threats. The external threats are there, but we can frequently, as long as somebody doesn't put in rogue access points and things like that, generally control them through the filtering of things that come into the network. You can't do a whole lot about social engineering or somebody clicking on an email while you can training and then don't allow them to install things. But the insider threats, these are people that are going to have a little bit of knowledge or maybe a lot of knowledge, and they're already on the network. Software vulnerabilities come up frequently. Update the software whenever it calls for an update, whenever there's an update available for it. And again, reverse engineering of the updates are going to give the hackers the opportunity to reverse engineer to find out what they've actually covered up. And if you haven't updated, then you become more vulnerable to these things. And then the methodologies and certification use of contractors, each has its advantage and disadvantage. The contractors, the issue there generally becomes they get a lot of knowledge or have to discover a lot of knowledge of your network. Always going to have a none that you're not going to reveal any of the information. about what's going on. But the methodologies, open source security testing methodology manual, there are guides to do these things. Ethical hackers, this is what ethical hackers do, is the security assessments, the penetration testers, and they're the white hats of the world. GIAC and offensive security are organizations that are going to have some information about how to conduct the tests. The methodology, the no holds barred, or rules or restrictions. The no holds barred is something that you really need to think through before you do it, because you can really disrupt the network when you do that. But if you do that, you'll know how well your network will stand up. You may want to use the identify only or identify and exploit, one or the other. If you only want to identify, you can do that, but you may want the attempt to identify and exploit these things. Attack profiles, we have black box, white box, and gray box. Black box, a blind test, is one where the ethical hacker doesn't know anything about the network before they start. A white box is the full disclosure that they have full information about the network. And then in the gray box, somewhere between, you have some information about the network, and you don't know which they are. And then we talk about environment and disclosure. We're going to use a test system or a production system. Keep in mind, if you do this on your production network, you can cause some issues. You can crash the network, for one thing. You could cause some jealousies or some hard feelings with the workforce. And then when are you going to do it? Are you going to do it during working hours or out of hours? The problem, say, well, we'll do it during non-working hours. You could do that, but a lot of the network monitoring software is set up to look for traffic after hours, and it's going to report that as an anomaly because there's traffic there that shouldn't be there. The other thing is, are you going to tell the people that they're coming? If you're going to tell people that you're having this, probably not going to get a very good reading on your social engineering training, how well people respond to that. So what's the methodology going to be? How are you going to do each of these things? And then we talk about vulnerability scanners, and it's software with a list of known exploits and vulnerabilities, and these things obviously are going to get updated on a regular basis. There are a number of them, a number of commercial softwares that are available.
This would be like Metasploit software, right?
Yes, Metasploit, Nessus. There's one that I can't think of as a British company. It's a really good one, really good commercial one that you could actually use to update all your Windows machines with. But yeah, those are the kinds of the vulnerability scanners to do that. Metasploit's a little bit more than a scanner because it actually will invoke the exploit. It will go through and do the exploit for you. Nessus just does the scanning. Say again?
So multiple. I mean, Metasploit actually has a tie-in of Nessus.
Yes.
And
exactly.
and all that.
Yep. All the above. And this OpenVAS client that they're showing here on the screen is, I read somewhere, the last free version of, or whatever, it's a spin-off of Nessus anyway. Because you can still get a community version as far as I know. I haven't tried in the last year or so. A community version, but it's not updated, appears to be not as updated as extensively as the commercial version.
If you go to sectools.org, it actually has the most current, and it's actually April of last year.
Yeah, but those are, and they're at some point, the problem with those that go commercial, at some point they may decide they're not going to do that anymore. And they've put this open VAS client, the open VAS software out as the replacement for Nessus. Actually, you can do active or passive detection. The issue here may become network traffic and how aggressively you go out these things. Active detection may wind up slowing down your network, crashing servers, those sorts of things. Passive is we're going to basically monitor traffic as it goes through these things. We're going to do a host, OS, or web application, each of these things, and then the standards-based reporting. These things do that. They're going to tell you what's wrong with the system, what the risks are with the system, and what you need to fix it generally. But they should be run against particularly your servers to see what risks you have. Intrusive versus non-intrusive, again, how much are we going to do with these things? There's a range of scanners. How intense is the scan going to be? If you're going to do a slow scan, it's going to be much slower than, or if you do a slow scan, it's not going to have as much traffic on the network. And the intensive scans, we're usually going to try to exploit the vulnerabilities. You may have false positives in these things. You may have false negatives in these things too. Lack of controls, identifying a lack of controls and misconfigurations, that's what we're trying to do with them. And then down here, this list of scan results, these are just the different ways that the results can be presented to you. The CVE is SANS Top 20, Bug Track. Each of these is basically a database that's going to tell us what the vulnerability is and one of the ways to, or a way to update it. And then the credentialed scan or non-credentialed scan. If we use a credentialed scan, you're going to get information about passwords and those sorts of things. A non-credentialed scan would be, you're going to see basically what a user that just comes onto your network would be able to determine from the scan itself. One of the things I didn't say here, this is the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. It's one that works pretty well on Windows systems. You can scan a single machine or multiple machines when you use it. Honeypots and honey nets, what they're really mostly used for now is to study how hackers attack networks. They can act as decoys. They have acted as decoys. When they first started talking about these things, I said put it close to a resource that you want to protect so that the hackers attack the honey pot. And a honey pot is going to be a single machine. A honey net is a network of honey pots. So the software simulates a host with typical services. One of the things that sometimes happens is you make it too easy, and if you make it too easy, the hackers get scared and leave. So low interaction, high interaction systems, whether you have how much you have on each of these things. A high interaction is a complete simulated system so that you can do those things. They're generally fallen in disrepute for trying to protect the network, but they are used for education purposes and for studying how hackers attack the networks. And there are some big ones out there. There's one of them that I'll try to find to show you that shows the attacks that are going on the internet at any given time, and it's based on a huge honey net that do those things. This one is actually a pretty short. You would think that this would be long with the vulnerability scanner, but what we're talking about is tools to scan for the vulnerabilities. And how are you going to do it? Are you going to just find them? Or are you going to hire an ethical hacker? Are you going to try to do it in-house? Are you going to hire a contractor? What kind of disclosures are you going to make? Are you going to tell your staff what's going on? Are you going to do it on a production network? Are you going to do it on a test network? Test network, as long as you have machines that are configured exactly like your production network, I guess would be okay. But you really want to test the security of the system. What are the vulnerabilities? What can and can't be done on the system? Describe the purpose of a honeypot and a honey net. The purpose in today's world is generally going to be to study what hackers are doing. How are they attacking the systems? With that, everybody's favorite, more questions. So let's take a look here for a few minutes at cryptography, which is one of the primary ways that we're going to be able to protect the information. And it's going to be the C and the I, using the C and the I, confidentiality and integrity of the data itself. So the objectives: understand the use of cryptography to ensure confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. It's going to be those two in the system. Identify and differentiate hashing, symmetric, and asymmetric encryption technologies and uses. And I have some margin notes in the instructor book, and one of the things it says is you need to distinguish between these items here. Select an appropriate cryptographic method for a given scenario. Identify different types of cryptographic attacks. We're always going to have those. Understand uses for steganography. One of the uses for steganography, and I guess it's probably been about 4 years ago now, they had a couple of Russians that were spying, and they were using steganography to hide airport plans of U.S. airports in pictures on a website, and then they have an activity for you to do steganography where you hide something in something. So with that, cryptography is secret writing is what it means, and what it does is creates confidentiality for us. We have plain text, the stuff that we can see and read, and then ciphertext, the stuff that's just gibberish. So the ciphertext can't be read without the key and the correct cipher. The cipher is the algorithm, the process that it uses in order to create the gibberish along with the key. The cipher itself, the process, can't stay hidden forever, so it's incumbent that we have a strong key with this so that we can properly protect our equipment. A few years ago, and I guess more than a few years ago, you guys that just retired won't remember the Walkers, but they were at Sublime Norfolk, and they were selling the Russians the cipher along with the keys so that they could intercept and decrypt message traffic, mostly submarine message traffic. When the Soviet Union fell, they found blocks and blocks and blocks of uncracked messages that had not been done yet. So the stronger the key, the longer it's going to take. They talk about, and later on talk about one-time pad, and some stuff is uncrackable. Well, maybe it is, but as the technologies improve, the speed of the computers improve, processing power improves, the uncrackable becomes less uncrackable. We also use cryptography for authentication and access control. We can use, and this is the smart cards, and what you actually have on them is a certificate. So this says, assuming the key is secure, an encrypted token could only have been created by the key holder. And that's what we're going to presume. And in all of this stuff, if you lose your token or your key fob, or you give away something, or later on if you get your private key compromised, then all bets are off on all this other stuff. And non-repudiation, the sender can't deny, repudiate the message as only they could have created it if it's encrypted, because they're going to use their key to do the encryption, or actually they're going to sign it with their key. Integrity, a ciphertext can't normally be modified or substituted with a different message, but the integrity, a hash of the message, is going to ensure that it hasn't been changed, that it wasn't changed in a route, that one of those man-in-the-middle techniques or didn't intercept the message and change it. Terminology in this in the cryptographic is plain text, and plain text is what you would type out on your keyboard in Word or Notepad or whatever else, and then that is converted to ciphertext using a key and an encryption algorithm. The cipher is the means of change, the cipher itself, and the key can be used to control the operation of the cipher. So the cipher is going to be the algorithm that we're going to use, and the key is going to be what it uses to do the encryption with. So cryptanalysis is the art of breaking or cracking cryptographic systems. And then they say meet Alice and Bob, and they're unfriends Eve and Mallory. Well, I couldn't find one with Mallory in it, but here are Bob and Eve in the world, and they frequently do use these names to demonstrate what goes on. And in this one, no big secret here, but I have to have my pictures, as you know. Bob's going to send a message, going to send hello, goes to the coding algorithm, the encoder, and it comes out gibberish, and it goes into the communication channel. Eve would be here listening and would only see the encrypted, goes over to the other side, and then we have the coding algorithm decoder, and it comes back to the original message. Now, to do that, we have going to have an agreement on the coding algorithm, and what you'll typically see is a negotiation process so that the systems decide upon the algorithm that is the strongest, that is common to both of them. And they'll keep going until they get down to the bottom of the barrel on this. And then we have keys, and when we have keys, and I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to do it anyway. We have symmetric keys, the same key on both sides, which you use on your wireless network, the pre-shared keys, the symmetric key. And we have asymmetric keys, which is going to be the public key infrastructure. I'm going to leave that one there because we're going to have some more of that here in some slides in a few minutes. Different kinds of cryptographic ciphers. We have the substitution cipher, and what it does, obviously, is substitute one letter for the other. So the cipher would be substitution. The key, and this is a ROT 13, which means we go 13 letters down. The key here would be 13 when we look at that. This goes back to Caesar, and Caesar used a rotation, and what they would do would be to wrap the message around a cylinder to do the encryption on it. Then we have transposition, and then this one 1, 2, and 1, 2, 2, and then some other elements here. But we have transposition in order to encrypt the data. Now these are very simple ciphers, obviously. When we start talking about the things we're using today, we're talking 256-bit, 1024-bit, 2048-bit keys in order to do this. So these are vulnerable to frequency analysis, and frequency analysis comes up to how many times, typically how many times a word or a letter is used. Some words, some letters are used more frequently than others. So when we do frequency analysis, we can look at those things. We have mathematicals here, and it's talked about a trapdoor, and a trapdoor is one that is easy to create but hard to break when we do these things. Simple to perform when the values are known, difficult to reverse when the values are not known. So trapdoor functions, and this is all kind of terminology here. Cryptographic keys can't, and what I said earlier, you can't keep the cipher itself, the process, completely secret. So the key ensures that the cipher is protected, the cipher being the encrypted information, even when the operation of the cipher is known. The key size really affects how long it takes to crack these things, how difficult it is for the computer to guess using brute force the key. And when we start talking about cracking these things, brute force means that you probably didn't use dictionary words. Dictionary attacks are relatively quick. Brute force attacks can take a long time to effect, because it has to try every combination that is available to it. These things also can use initialization vectors, and the initial the key alone, if we use the plain text values for the same words, would be the same, and then we could use the frequency analysis in order to do that. The initial vectors are thrown in to give it a little bit different look in the encrypted ciphertext. I'll get there. One-time pads, message and key, the message and key are the same size, and they say impossible to correct if the key is sufficiently random. And in these things, the key gotta be random, and it must not be reused. And that's one of the things that makes WEP easier to correct. It is relatively easy to crack on a busy network. You can do it in about 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe even less. But the initialization vectors are short. The actual key that it uses is even not the entire initialization vector, and there are so few of them that after, and they say, I think 50,000 packets, you get collision, so that you reuse the initialization vector, and when you do that, it patterns, and that's what allows the system to crack it. We have encryption technologies. We have a hash, symmetric, and asymmetric, and we talked about those a little bit. Hash is a one-way process. And what I want to do, I found this website. There are a number of hashes. What I want to show a couple of things on a hash. This is a hash online, and then let's I'm going to put in something really complex. This is my text. My text, period. and then we can hash it. The SHA-256, let's start back with SHA-1, hash it, and you see how much smaller the result is. And then we'll go to MD5, and then we'll go to SHA-256. So the SHA 512 should be really big. It just keeps going. The SHA should be, let's do MD5 again. And let's do SHA-1. The MD5 is generally going to be the weaker of these things. One of the other ways, or one of the things that we can do, I'll go to this download Nessus. I actually did it. I'll look at it tomorrow. We have an MD5 hash of the file that was downloaded. You can get MD5 software, and we have that hash, and I've copied and pasted, and I did something else here. I'll go browse for the Nessus, and it creates the hash is the MD5, and as you can see here, the MD5 is significantly shorter than the SHA-1, the SHA-256, and the 512 just keeps going. I pasted it in here, and we click verify, and it says that they matched. What that's telling me is that what was posted and the hash algorithm run on it was what I actually got. So it can be used to verify the integrity of files. It also is typically the way passwords are going to be stored. Passwords are generally not passed across the network, but a hash of the password is used, or the password is used to encrypt something else, and hash, and then compares the hashes. Symmetric key, and the symmetric keys are going to be faster. Symmetric keys mean we have the same key on both ends. The problem with a symmetric key is, how do you get it there? Do you call somebody up and here's the key? I mean, do you send it? Symmetric keys are much faster, but the distribution of the keys and this keeping the keys secret are a really big issue. Asymmetric keys mean that we have different keys on each side, and this is going to be the public key. We have a public key and a private key, and they both come from the same process. We use one to encrypt and the other one to decrypt. And if you encrypt with a public key, you cannot decrypt with a public key. You can only decrypt with a private key. And the private key needs to be kept private. The public key, just as it says, is public. Anybody can have it. Everybody can have it. We want people to have it. So those things are used, the keys, the symmetric and the asymmetric, and we'll see a little bit later that what we typically use is a combination of these two things, the PKI, the public key infrastructure, and the symmetric key. The algorithms work, they're mathematically derived, and they don't really want us to know all that much about them. But the security, how the algorithm works, and the different algorithms are going to have different security functions, different levels of security. We've used DES for a lot of years, and then it had an issue, and they decided that if they used it twice, encrypted the data twice, it would make it twice as secure. That didn't work. But when they encrypted it 3 times, 3 rounds, it made it secure. And the one that we use now, as we go along, they had a contest, and AES is the is the algorithm that's used. Now we have, again, a number of them, and there's a list in the book, and we'll see some of that here in a little bit. Key size, typically the bigger the key size, the better the encryption is going to be when we use those things. Performance, and back to performance, the symmetric is much faster, and I've read some places up to 1,000 times faster than asymmetric. And it uses a lot less processing power. The cost of what goes on, and some of that could be the cost of the devices that we use in order to use the algorithms, can affect those things. Some of the algorithms some are open source, but many of them are commercial. We do these things. The hash function, we looked at it. It's a one-way ciphertext. So there's no public-private key, no asymmetric key, no sharing it. What the systems do when you use a hash is you create the hash, and you do much like I did. You create your own hash from whatever was used to get it there, MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, and any key that might be used to do that. And again, here it says it's used for password storage and checksum integrity. We just looked at the checksum integrity. The secure hash algorithm, the MD5, SHA is generally going to be stronger than MD5, the message digest algorithm. There are some others that you talk about research and development in the advanced communication in Europe, RACE, RIPE MD, each of those are used in their own world, but the ones that we typically use are going to be SH1 and MD5, SH1 again being the more secure of them. The hashed message authentication code, HMAC, is a way to prove the integrity and authenticity of a message. So we have a hash of the message, much like we just did the hash of the file. And the hash is sent along with it, like it was posted on this file, and then at the other end goes through the same process to check to see if the message has been changed. Symmetric encryption, and when we look at these things, many of these algorithms, and they expect you to know which are which, usually symmetric and asymmetric, and maybe key size that's available for them. But symmetric is the same secret key is used for encryption and decryption. Again, the problem is storing and distributing the key in a secure manner. And in these ciphers, we'll just go down a number of things on each slide here. That with block ciphers and stream ciphers. What a block cipher does is split up the data into blocks and then encrypts the blocks and sends the blocks. So it splits the plain text into equal blocks, subject to rounds of transposition and substitutions, and rounds is the number of times that it goes through the encryption process. The stream cipher encrypts 1 bit or 1 byte at a time. The plain text is combined with a random key stream and an initialization vector in order to create the ciphertext. And I think that generally the block cipher is going to be quicker than the stream cipher. Symmetric encryption, the standards here, the ciphers that we use, DES, Data Encryption Standard, and triple DES. DES is really of itself, this one is I think no longer considered secure. It's insecure. It has been cracked. Triple DES, what we do is use the DES process 3 times, 3 rounds in order to use the encryption. The Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, is the new standard that's been adopted after the contests that to determine which one's going to be used. So it's going to be the strongest one that we have right now. RSA is Revest Ciphers, and Ron Revest is the R in this. He is a mathematics instructor at MIT. It's a stream cipher, and the rest of these are not, so we have a stream cipher here. And it depends upon its strength is the difficulty in factoring very large prime numbers, and that's the way it generates its key. International Data Encryption Algorithm, IDEA, and Blowfish and Twofish, which are also strong, very, very strong ciphers, but the one that principally is used right now, AES, is the new standard. The asymmetric keys are public and private keys. When we get these things, we have 2 keys, one public that can go to anybody and one private, which you really need to keep private. And if the private key ever gets compromised, then you've compromised all of your encrypted data. So we have this thing, one key encrypts or decrypts, but it can't do both. And one key cannot be derived from the other. They're derived together. The private key has to be kept secret. And the public key is easy to distribute because anybody can have it. And what we want to do, and that's a lot of what goes on websites. If we have a website here, we want to go to we'll make this a website over here and this us. I know I can't draw very well with this mouse. But we go here and ask for a secure HTTPS connection. The web server then sends us its public key. And we create a session key here, encrypt the session key with the public key, and send the encrypted key back. And the website then uses its private key to decrypt what we encrypted with the public key. And now we have a symmetric key that we can use for that session. When you close the session, that session key should be destroyed, and that's why a lot of particularly bank sites, after you log off, say close your browser in order to completely complete the session, to make it go away. What happens is when you do that is this key gets destroyed, so that the session key is no longer available. And even if they break this key, the private key, that it was only used in the creation of the session keys. You don't have the session keys. They still have to be decrypted to actually get the information from everybody. Rsa Security, this is Revest. I couldn't remember the rest of them. Revest, Shamir, and Edelman created the RSA standards, and again, they're mathematicians, and theirs is based upon the ability to factor very, very large numbers to get prime numbers. Widely used in secure sockets, SSL and TLS, HTTPS is used in that one. And it's the basis of digital certificates and digital signature schemes. Key size is 11 bytes. It's used for authentication, integrity, non-repudiation, and key exchange. One of the things that we do need to have secure is the key exchange when we're sending them back and forth. It says integrity, the digital signatures, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. So Alice creates a digest of the data used using a pre-agreed algorithm and then encrypts the digest using her private key. The digest is going to be the hash. The signature is attached to the document. Bob decrypts the signature using Alice's public key, resulting in the original digest. So generally, we're going to use the public key to encrypt and the private key to decrypt. But when we're doing signatures, we're going to encrypt with the private key because you're trying to identify yourself to everybody. You want your signature to be able to be decrypted with your public key, and you could actually send the public key along with the message, or you can post it on a website. Lots of places you can send it from, and generally whoever provided the key, once you do it, you don't have to send it. They're going to get it from the internet. Bob calculates his own message digest, his own hash, and compares it with Alice's. If they two match, the data has not been tampered during the transmission. And we're also now guaranteeing Alice's identity. By the way, if you want a free email signing certificate, and they are a good idea to have, Komodo.com, unless they've changed it, gives you one. You have to renew it every year. You have to get a new one every year, but you can do those. This is a picture of the same thing that hopefully a picture of the same thing I talked to. We have a large message. We create a hash. Create the hash, and then this one's going the other way, though, that Bob's sending the message to Alice. So Bob's private key is used for the digital signature to encrypt this, and then we have the encrypted message digest. You notice in this we're signing the message, we're not encrypting the message. So we encrypt the message digest, send it along the way, and then the hash function is created. The digital signature is decrypted using Bob's public key, and we can then be sure of the identity of the sender and that the message has not been tampered with en route. Just like when we looked at the one that the file hadn't been tampered with on the download. Digital envelopes provide confidentiality and privacy. What we typically are going to do, says here, Alice encrypts the message using a secret key cipher such as AES or Blowfish. The secret key itself is then encrypted using the public key, cryptography with Bob's public key, whoever you're sending it to, and then attached to the message. So what we're doing with this one, we're using both a public key and a private key because the symmetric or the private key encryption is much faster, takes a lot fewer resources. So we create a key, encrypt the data with a key, then encrypt the key with the public key infrastructure, the PKI key. Send the encrypted key along with the message, the email message itself. When it gets to the other end, the receiver decrypts the key and then uses the secret key to decrypt the message, so that we leverage the ability to use the public key infrastructure, and it's going to be more resilient. It's going to be probably more secure, but we leverage it, but also use the ability for the faster and fewer required resources of the private key. And this is another picture of that. Protects a message without needing to first arrange the sender and receiver to have the same secret key. The message, symmetric key, the receiver's public key, we encrypt it, send it along the way in the digital envelope, the encrypted message and the encrypted symmetric key go in the same envelope, the same email, sent along to the receiver. The receiver then uses their private key to decrypt the symmetric key, and then use the symmetric key to decrypt the data. Diffie-Hellman is a key agreement. It is a protocol that's used to securely agree on a key, to securely pass keys. We actually what happens, and I've got a picture here in a second, that the two users wind up creating the same key without actually passing any data. So Bob and Alice agree on shared integers P and G to use in the key generation. These values can be known to eavesdroppers Eve without compromising this process. They then choose different private integers A and B, and these values must not be disclosed to anyone else. So what we need here is an encrypted channel in order to send these things, because if we don't want them to be intercepted. Alice doesn't tell Bob A, and Bob doesn't tell Alice B. Alice and Bob calculate integers A and B based on shared and private values that they send back and forth. Let me go to the picture here. Maybe it'll make some sense. So we have Bob and Alice here, and they pick P and G. P is a prime number and G is the generator. Alice chooses a secret random number, A equals 6, and Bob chooses a random number, B equals 5. Alice computes A equal G to the A mod P, and mod's the modulus. So A equal 11 to the 6 mod 23, which is equal to 9. Bob then computes the same thing, but he gets 5. So Alice receives 5 from Bob, and Bob gets 9 from Alice. So the secret key is B to the A mod P. So the K is going to be equal 5 to the 6th, and the modulus is 23, and the answer is 8. Over here, K is equal to 9 to the 5th. Modulus is still 23, and we come up with 8 again. So they've created the same key by sharing some information, and that's the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. There is some, and there's an article on the internet that's called the Diffie-Hellman key exchange for the non-mathematician, because this is one of those things that really does use a lot of mathematics in order to make it work. ECC and quantum cryptology. ECC is elliptical curve cryptography. This is another one they talk about generating a trapdoor, something that's easy to calculate and difficult to reverse. It can use smaller keys to obtain the same security. It's a little bit complex. Quantum cryptography down here is something that's experimental, and what it uses is the quantum physics properties of these things, and it actually this is getting into some proton spin or electron spin and those kinds of things, and filters, photon filtering, in order to do the encryption, because they become unique. It's something that is experimental at the time, may have some use in the future. Transport encryption. So we talked about data, and data can either be at rest, stored someplace, or it can be in motion in transport. When we transport the data, we want to make it as secure as possible. And we encrypt it. Encrypting data can be sent over a secure VPN, HTTPS, wireless, and they put WEP in. Don't do that. WPA, WPA2 is what you want to use. Data that's encrypted on a Microsoft machine, for instance, using a Microsoft encryption, when it leaves the computer, it gets decrypted before it's transferred. So we need to transfer it using some sort of a secure transport mechanism. The VPN, HTTPS, you can transfer it that way, and then if you're using wireless, don't use open, use WPA, WPA2. And key exchange, the inbound and out-of-bound. Inbound simply means that we transfer the key using the same medium that we're going with the data. So in-band would be over the network, and we can do public keys with that. Out-of-band is that you use some other methodology to transfer the keys. You could a phone call. You probably don't want to use an email because email is really not all that secure. You can encrypt it, obviously, but now we're doing how we're going to send the key. And the session and ephemeral keys, we kind of talked about those a little bit, how we do that. What perfect forward secrecy means if you compromise the long-term keys, you don't compromise the session keys, because they're only used for the session, and once the session's done, they're destroyed. Cryptographic attacks, what we want to do is to decipher encrypted data without authorization. We may want to impersonate a person or an organization by appropriating their digital signature or the certificate that they use, the HTTPS certificate, which would, always makes us feel better when we see that little lock up there and it doesn't turn red. In addition, a non-malicious cryptanalysis is undertaken on encryption systems with the purpose of trying to detect weaknesses in the technology. Again, we're ethical hackers here, trying to find weaknesses in order to improve the security. And then they have this quote here from Bruce Schneier, and this was earlier in the book, but it's a good place. Anyone from the most clueless amateur to the best cryptographer can create an algorithm that he himself cannot break. It's not even hard. What is hard is creating an algorithm that no one else can break, even after years of analysis. And the only way to prove that is to subject the algorithm to years of analysis by the best cryptographers around. So we want to try to find the weaknesses in these things and improve them. Mathematical attacks use weaknesses in the cipher, weaknesses in the key space, or weaknesses in the implementation software. And we talked about man-in-the-middle attack, inadequate authentication, not using an encrypted channel, inadequate session control. Time stamping will help that out a lot. And then side channel, they talk about it being a mathematical analysis. What they do is observe what goes on in these things and then try to get it try to decrypt it from there. This is a little chart that I've seen for years. I've got ease of use over here, functionality and security. When you go on this, what it really telling you, if it's secure, then it's far away from functional and easy to use. What we generally are going to have in security is something in the middle. It depends on what we need for our specific purpose, but that kind of gives you an idea. If it's easy to use, it's not going to be very secure. If it's secure, it's not necessarily going to be easy to use. The last one talks about steganography. And what we do with steganography is we hide something inside something else. And what we do use is the least significant bit generally in a picture, because well, it is going to be in a picture. It could be in a video, an audio or a video also. And they generally don't change the size of the file. If any of you watch NCIS, they had the one where they were at Gitmo, and Abby kept saying, there's something wrong with these videos, something wrong with these videos. And what they had done was hide the instructions for the revolution at Gitmo in videos that were being sent to the prisoners. And I talked about earlier on that the Soviet spies were passing information back to the Soviet Union using pictures on a website where they were hiding, inside the pictures were hiding plans for airports. Some of them maybe not big airports. Counterfeit deterrence system are use steganography. The new money, you look at it and then you have the you can see the watermarks inside of the bills and printers. And what this one over here is showing these things, but this is actually printer Id watermarks, where printer manufacturers watermark the pages, and it tells you when it was printed, what the serial number of the printer was, and a whole lot of information about the document itself. So it can be used for a number of things, and they've got an activity for you to do on that one also. So in the review, it's understand the use of cryptography to ensure confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, can't deny that you did it. Identify and differentiate hashing, symmetric and asymmetric encryption technologies and uses. Select an appropriate cryptographic method for a given scenario. Identify different types of cryptographic attacks and understand the use of steganography. When you get ready to take the test for the encryption algorithms and all that, what I would do is say everything is this except, and learn the exceptions. As you saw on the list, most of them were actually symmetric algorithms, so you may want to go from there and learn the others. So it's question time. What is the principal use of symmetric encryption? What's the principal use of any encryption? Did everybody leave?
No, just brain fried.
Okay, but what do we use encryption for? You and me both. It is close to my midnight, for those of you who aren't going to stay here with me until midnight. What do we do with all of this? Symmetric and asymmetric, all of them. In the CIA of the world, what do they do?
Basically like secret writing. Basically everything is done by secret, basically.
Secret. So it's going to be for confidentiality, right?
Yeah.
So you guys got too much experience. You're trying to read too much into these questions. And symmetric is quicker, faster, generally faster, better for encrypting large amounts of data than asymmetric. Asymmetric, slower, takes a lot more processing power. What features of a one-time pad make the system cryptographically secure?
Basically, it's kind of like what you were talking about with logging off your bank account. You know, as soon as you log off, it's gone.
Yeah.
And basically, it's trash, so you can't even get out on it. So the public's gone, but the private's still there.
Yeah. So a one-time pad, what you said is right. We don't want to reuse it, and it's got to be a truly random generated. And it's not that easy to come up with a true random number generator. Which offers better security, MD5 or SHA, SHA?
Should be a SHA, right?
Yep. I mean, hopefully you saw that when I did the one with the,
Right, yeah.
when I compared the hashes that it generated from that file. Which symmetric cipher is being selected in many new products? Which the one that we're using now? The one that the government just adopted and approved, and everybody said, and there we go. So this is it.
AES.
AES.
Now, is that from NIST also, or is that different?
No, that is the quote the standard now is AES in the U.S. The Europeans use some other ones.
Okay.
And remember, it's the strongest. And it's not in everything yet. If you go some older Cisco routers, we used to do encryption on those things, and they had some really old algorithms still on them, and they just didn't update them. The new ones are going to have the new standard, and you'll find that yeah, I want to use this, but you go to and you look on your device and it's not there. So you have to use what's available in each of these things.